Essentially, there are two main components to living off grid. And in my opinion, the first one of those is really easy. It's the second one that's actually really difficult, and that's what I'm trying to figure out this week. To live off grid, I guess, is to be disconnected from public utilities. And the first one that everyone thinks about is electricity. But the deal is you don't really need much electricity. When we moved up here, we were charging our mobile phones off the car battery, and then because we were using our computers and that would take a bit more power, we then had to use a 60-watt panel, which is nothing. They're not very expensive to buy. But the more we were up here and the more power we were using, things like power tools and then camera batteries and then eventually a fridge and things like that. So then we needed more power, but really that's not difficult to install. It's just an outlay of cash. That's the tricky bit of it. And it is quite a lot of cash. I mean, you're probably paying for, let's say, 10 years of electricity up front. At first, that doesn't really make sense, but financially over the long term, it works. But there's nothing necessarily difficult about setting up a solar system. For me, it's being disconnected from the public water supply that's actually the tricky bit of off-grid living. So the thing with council water is it arrives pressurized, first of all, so you can just pump. You don't need to pump it, it just goes wherever you want it. You can lead it around your house. It's also drinkable. The council also deals with the cleaning of that water, and as well they deal with sewage. That's quite a lot of different kind of components that I've had to figure out for myself. So this is the first part of that water problem. This was actually quite easy to solve. There's just a couple of gutters collecting rainwater. We're in New Zealand, we get plenty of rain. And I've run them through to here. This grill gets rid of all of the junk. And you can see this is just from last night. We got a load of rain and then, yeah, a lot of leaf litter gets in there. So that stops that. And then it goes into this tank, which is 5,000 litres, which isn't huge, but it's enough for now. The water from the rain tank so far would not really be drinkable. Even though you've got the little grill on top, you're still going to get a lot of leaf matter, which will then collect at the bottom of this tank. And you're just going to have a lot of kind of like rotting organic matter down at the bottom of the tank. So you need a way of filtering that. The water goes up this tube into the pump. The pump then pressurizes it so you can push it out and then push it into the bus and into the tap. But it also goes through a couple of filter systems. Each one of those gets rid of any particles. And then there's one sort of final stage, which I haven't put in yet, but I will do, which is you can run the water through a UV filter, and then that gets rid of any disease that could be there from, say, if you've got like bird shit on the roof or something like that that gets washed into the water. The filters aren't going to necessarily get rid of the pathogens or whatever, but a UV filter will kill those off. That will be the final stage, and that will be the drinking water. Obviously that 5,000 litre tank isn't going to be enough for us long term, but I'll eventually put a gutter up onto this roof, which has got a lot more surface area, and then get a larger tank, probably like 20,000 litres, and then we'll have plenty of water. This is our current showering setup. It's pretty basic. The reason I bought this is it doesn't require mains power. It just uses those little 2D batteries that give it the spark. So you connect it to the gas bottle, gas comes in, the pressure, once it's got water going through it, the pressure will build, it lights the flame and you get hot water. When I first moved up here, we used it in the woods just because we didn't have any power at all. So we couldn't get pressure from the water tank. So the only way to get pressure, I thought, was I'll put a hose pipe down into the woods so there's a drop quite a few meters, and that gives enough pressure just about to get this going so I could get a hot shower out of it. But it was a kind of it's pretty basic. I mean, even now we've got the tanks connected to the pump, so we've got a bit more pressure, so it's decent, but it's definitely not as good as a kind of house shower. This is a standard water heater. I've not had it that long. It's really good. I mean, it's 4 times more expensive than the other one, and I'd say it's probably about 4 times as good, mainly because it can just heat up more water more quickly. So from here, I've got pipes running out to go into the bus, so we've got hot water in a sink here for the kitchen, and then I've also dug a trench just through here in the past few days, and that will allow us to get hot water over there. I dug this trench yesterday, so this will allow me to run some pipes out of the bus through here, and then that will give us an outdoor shower with a lot more pressure. I've left the best bit till last. This is where our composting toilet's going to go. It's quite weird. I think that if you spoke to someone from the developing world, someone that has to travel a long way to a well, carry water and bring it all the way back to their village so that they can have fresh drinking water, and then you explain to that person in the developed world, we have clean drinking water piped right to our house and we can just turn on the tap and drink straight from the tap. And then you explain to them, we get that water and then we shit in it. I think that they would find that quite odd, and I'm beginning to think that's probably the right reaction to it. The more I look into this, the more that I start to think that adding water to human waste is actually not a very good idea. It doesn't help the situation at all. All it does is move the problem from one area, i.e. your house, to another area, to the sewage treatment plants. I think adding water creates a problem in its own right. So when people think of composting toilets, I think they often think of something that smells, and the reason for that is they're probably thinking of things like, you know, like festival toilets and long drops and things like that. And the issue with those is, well, they're usually not composting toilets, but the issue is that you've got solids and liquids mixing together, and that's what creates the smell. Like, if you pick up, you know, when you're a kid and you pick up like a cow pat that's been dried in the sun and it's like a kind of, you can throw it like a frisbee, it doesn't smell of anything much. It's only when it's mixed with urine or water that it has a smell. And I think that's what is quite interesting about composting toilets, as most kind of modern composting toilets now separate liquids and solids. And as soon as you've done that, the solid component of it really doesn't smell. And as it starts to compost, the longer that process goes on, the easier the thing is to deal with, because it becomes more and more like standard soil. This is the Nature's Head composting toilet, and I think for small spaces like buses, tiny houses, boats, whatever, I think this is probably the best composting toilet you can get. This splits, liquids go this way and then solids go this way, and then the solids are mixed with, and you put in coconut husk, which sort of dries everything out, and it also helps the composting process. When it comes to composting toilets, there's really two main types. You've got systems like this, where the whole thing sits in one unit above the floor, and then the split systems where you have a more standard looking toilet on the floor, and then that goes down to a waste unit below the floor. And that split system, to me, has quite a few advantages. I like this, it does work, but the problem with something like this is that this is a single unit. So when you go to empty it, you have to lift the whole thing up. I mean, even when this is empty, it's reasonably heavy and full. It's quite tricky. And then, you know, in a bus, I'm sort of carrying it down the steps, and then I've got to take it over to the compost bin and empty it. So there's a kind of a faff to doing that. Whereas when you have a system whereby the waste going outside, it's a much larger container. So these things can last up to sort of 6 months or even longer, depending on how often you're using them. And then you just change the containers around and you allow that to keep composting. And then when you go to use it, when the stuff that you're emptying out is fully composted, and it can be used straight away. So it has a function as well. It's funny, all this time I'm calling it waste, but actually the end product can be used. You know, you can use it on your fruit trees and other trees, not in your vegetable garden, but everywhere else you've got kind of a source of compost. So I think that's a really good system. The one thing about these split systems is they do require a bit of space, obviously, underneath the building. So you generally need about sort of 500 mil plus, you know, so sort of 2 foot, something like that. So I think for tiny houses and things like that, they'd work pretty well, as those are typically on wheels. And with this, I've just about got enough room. I'll have to sort of level things out to keep it flat, but this should work pretty well. My next project for this week is to work out where the composting loo is going to go, and then where I need to run pipe work so I can get water to the shower. I've got a playlist which is this whole thing being built, so I'll link to that in case you're interested to watch the whole build. Thanks so much for watching, and hopefully I will see you next week.